Well, we'll see how far we can make Betsy and Kate hike, but I think just drive like to Beartown and then hike Beartown Trail and try to make it around back to the road.
Cool.
So it'll be cool if we just like walk out the door at this point. That will be winning. All right, we are live on YouTube.
Thanks everyone for coming out on such short notice. I didn't think we were gonna get the meeting together quite this quickly in 3 or 4 days, so that's great. I would have liked to have a little more background for you guys, but because we were able to get it together so quick, I wasn't really able to prepare a packet.
Technically, go ahead and call the meeting to order and should do a roll call.
Okay.
I mean, I guess it's video, so the roll call doesn't matter. We do need to call it.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 10:07. Gloria?
I think we need to roll call. We're here.
Okay.
Yeah, stand up.
Entire committee is here.
Thank you.
And no extras.
Yep, correct. And I'd like to add one item to the agenda. I wanted to have a brief discussion. Item will become item 2 and everything else will just shift down, but I wanted to briefly talk about the DHM master planning process as well. Mainly regarding, we briefly, when we met with DHM and they came and presented at the last trustee meeting, I personally didn't feel we gave them the most clear direction. I thought it was a little vague. So I wanted to see if we could maybe spend 10 or 15 minutes kind of honing in so we might be able to give Lee a little bit clearer direction. I think the reason I felt that way, and if you guys disagree, please speak up, was in my prior discussions with Lee, we had kind of discussed that we had been through a pretty robust master planning process and visioning in the past. And we were looking to partially use some of these funds out of the, I believe it's 48,000 for the actual procurement of some construction documents. So at the end of this process, which will likely be in December, we would have some shovel ready projects where we already have the blueprints kind of ready to go. And I think where we were, the main area we were looking for that would be an ice rink. As we kind of broaden the scope or look a little larger at the scale of development, I think we may lose that ability to have actual construction documents. So I kind of wanted to just get some input from the trustees as far as, would we still like to prioritize the actual procurement of construction documents, or do we feel we need to spend some more time in the scope and scale discussion and prioritize that and worry essentially next spring about possibly going to an RFP for some of those assets as far as development goes. And with that, I'll kind
So
of,
that'll be item 2 on the agenda.
yeah.
Should we just kick it off with the first item?
Well, I was counting the call as item 1.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I can't see the agenda.
Means you're skipping the growing dome.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's roll right into this discussion.
Go into DHM. Okay.
So really just looking for a little bit of feedback as to which the priority would be. Is it kind of having these larger discussions about scope and scale, or do we feel that we could pretty quickly hone in on that and focus on the actual asset development? It's, you know, and this will also be kind of tied in with item 3, the Kendall deck, which will come a little later. And you know, that's going to be a little bit more of a complicated discussion as well. It's the recommendation of staff at this point that we exit that contract with Dean Bosworth, and DHM would be a logical partner to develop that asset and procure the construction documents through this master planning process. So I think my intention was always, you know, let's do the master planning, let's make it a subset of the community builders master planning, and let's see if we can't get ice rink and deck plans out of that. So kind of a lot to chew on, but at this point, I'd like to open it up to some discussion here. And to be clear, I don't have a preference. We just need the direction.
My initial thought, if we're backing out of the Kendall deck, is just take a step back and focus on just creating a really good plan that it's gonna have both the Kendall deck and the ice rink and kind of everything laid out in a way that we want to before we start getting any construction plans.
Sure.
How you guys feel about that?
Yeah, it kind of feels like we're sort of back in this conundrum again where, I mean, I don't know if it's a conundrum. It's a choice of of strategies, I think, that we approach Kendall with. It's like, I've always leaned towards and had preference for this like bigger plan ahead of like ticking off these little things off the list. Because it just seemed like, I think the classic example is like, we don't want to have these amazing construction documents for the ice rink and plunk it in front of the rec center and suddenly realize our views are skewed, or some kind of like, or it turns out when we did a bigger vision for the master plan, where we ended up putting the ice rink could have made really great parking. And so I think all along with this process, I've tried to really advocate for the bigger, even if it's in this phased line out, where we're like, we know that we're not going to get to fire rings for 5 years. I'm okay with that. Just knowing that like the deck is in phase 1 and the ice rink is in phase 1 and they are going to look like this because ultimately by phase 5, it's going to sort of fit together like this in a really intentional way. So my overall just like philosophical approach to this is to try to look at it. And that's where I was headed with DHM in my comments. And I realized they could have been very misconstrued. I almost considered like backtracking in our meeting on Monday, where I was like, dream big. I don't mean like dream big development. I mean, dream smart.
Sure.
In terms of scope and like looking at it like, okay, maybe we don't ever want, like, it's not necessarily a dream, like a big list of things, like it may be dream less, like dream more minimalistic, but design it in a really intentional, smart, phased out way so that everything fits together. In the end, it feels right.
Sure. So I don't think that the construction document, like kind of pursuing those is mutually, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive.
Sure.
We can be doing spatial arrangements and where things are going to live and where there's essentially going to be space earmarked for those.
Right.
And that's going to be something we're going to be working on through December.
Okay.
And that I think is the main goal out of this master planning is where are things going to go?
Right.
And
like a spatial configuration.
Right. But that's not going to eat up the entirety of our budget unless we really drag that process out.
Cool.
So this is more, I mean, I think there's a consensus that the deck and an ice rink are the two highest priorities.
I disagree.
For phase 1.
I disagree. I don't think there is.
Okay.
I don't think we have a consensus at all yet.
I'm saying that based on historical discussions and visioning sessions and community input and
Yeah, I didn't,
things like
that's
that.
still not my takeaway. I
Okay.
think, like if we look back at the Kendall visioning sessions, like number 1 was terrain. Ice rink was popular and it came up a lot, but it was like maybe 2 or 3.
Okay.
I think what ice rink
Second was
gets.
safety, but definitely not a priority for the community. That was just like, we need the resources there to be accessible. And that's why the deck was a priority, but that didn't come out of visioning sessions.
Right. Okay.
And the ice rink was getting priority as in like, it has the least amount of like controversial support. There's broad support and it's an easy one. No one is opposed to an ice rink. We could put it that way.
I think that's maybe I misspoke. That was the sentiment I was trying to express. And, terrain expansion is high on the list. DHM does not do that type of work. They don't do terrain assessment. They don't do lift alignments. They don't do things like that. So knowing that space is earmarked in the master plan, essentially very broadly over the ski area, it's just going to say expansion.
Yeah.
But and this is the direction we need. If you guys feel like we need to be pursuing that more aggressively, then we need to give DHM that direction. But that's a huge process, and we don't have a robust enough budget to really see that process through. So I think what we've done is kind of, staff probably internally made the decision that we're not pursuing ski expansion as part of the deliverables for this master planning process, but we are earmarking the space and saving the space for it. Because that's probably going to have to be its own community process, unless, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it's a really complicated, this is a huge puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's been, 2 years of work going into it, giving us direction. And I definitely get the idea of pushing forward with the things that we know we could do. Like we know that we could get construction documents and be able to build an ice rink, and that'd be super cool. But I agree with what Sally said about each of these things that we do now without having the vision of the whole, create constraints. Like I think that our biggest constraint right now is the building that's there.
Totally.
And if we could, without people getting upset, knock down that building and start from scratch, I think we would have a much simpler process.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
I mean, the building's just so problematic in terms of like its size, its placement, the deck around it, like the snow issues.
The kitchen, the lack of all.
And it feels like we've decided that this constraint was permanent because of the effort that the community put into building it and the emotional attachment to it. But if we were to pursue this objectively with no emotion and no community emotion and just what was best, we probably would just knock it down and start over. And so what I do think we should, and I know we're on YouTube, but I'm going to be super transparent about all this stuff.
I agree with you. Yeah.
I think what we should do is we should develop a master plan that anticipates knocking it down at some point in the future and working around it. And we should use it as in phase 1, that's still there. We start working on other things from the master vision. And then maybe in phase 3, that gets knocked down and replaced with something that makes more sense.
So I think that I absolutely agree with that. We should be looking at this as essentially a vacant parcel of land when we're looking at it from a master planning perspective. Does that mean that we're willing to go 5 years without deck?
Possibly. So similarly, I think
that's the direction I'm seeking from you guys.
Okay.
Similarly, I think the same thing's true about terrain. We can't tackle that now. We tried, coming at it with the committee. It blew up for a bunch of reasons that I don't think actually had to do with the substance of what the end result would be, other than the relationships in town. The idea of partnering with somebody was just too scary. And the idea of doing it ourselves was too significant. It was too big a project.
It's overwhelming.
But I think what we should be anticipating, similar to some future state of what that building is or isn't, we should be anticipating terrain expansion. We're not going to design it. We're not going to think about how much capacity that is. But when we design the base area, we should assume that someone in the future is probably going to expand ski area terrain and also expand mountain biking terrain.
Sure.
And so whatever we do plan and the constraints we create, we should anticipate terrain expansion still.
So where the direction I suppose is needed is, if we're gonna, if it's the recommendation of staff that we back out of our contract for the deck design, due to a variety of reasons, and we're not pursuing those plans as a deliverable from DHM, are we comfortable telling the community, we're going to go through this process through December. We're not going to build a deck this year. And it could be 5 years where the deck is just ripped off and that building is just going to sit without a deck.
You're right. That's going to create some discord in the community.
But we also shouldn't, if the master plan result is to replace that building, we shouldn't be budgeting for a deck in 2023, which we've done.
So I think the direction to DHM potentially sounds something like this, and I'm going to try and be more clear than I've been in the past because I don't think it's working. The direction to DHM could sound something like this. I think because what we want overall, what we want to do at Kendall is in the spirit of what the community wants to see at Kendall. And I think the community has broad agreement on the chairlift is awesome. When the chairlift runs, it's total magic over there. When families are tailgating, it's magical. They like the community outdoor space. You know, when the bathrooms and the deck aren't working, it infringes on the experience over there. I think when the parking gets really congested, it infringes on the experience. And what I've noticed about Kendall is actually when things are working and it's super magical, there's a tremendous amount of gratitude for that very present moment, but there isn't necessarily an awareness of like what it takes to create that magic or what that's going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And I think that's all of the work that the staff does behind the scenes that seems effortless and easy that makes that magic happen over there. It's like what Chris is doing, sweating it out when it's negative 20 degrees to turn that lift on. That's not necessarily something that the community acknowledges in its like master planning vision for it, you know? So it seems like what we have to do here is, okay. And then, so when the lift stopped working or when the parking lot is really unsafe and congested, that is when the community's like, whoa, this can't happen. How is this happening? And so I think it's kind of our job on the behalf of the like town government to make that work well and seem effortless, but potentially taking away the deck and having the lift break this winter a bunch, I actually think can be a real catalyst to getting community involvement and community like awareness of, do we need the building? I mean, I got married in that building. I have a very strong emotional attachment to it, but potentially like these past few years have shown us what Kendall's like without the building. I haven't been in that building in the winter in 2 years, probably. So we can certainly function without the building. And what I'm wondering if the direction to DHM looks like something like this. We give the community a little bit of time to sort of simmer with, I mean, I might simmer with it and be like, no, that building is going to stay. You know, I've spent a couple winters thinking about it and the idea of getting rid of it is too much for me. But it kind of looks like this, and I think we keep going back to scale and scope. And I see this as like fully integrated into planning. So like scale and scope in phase 1 is, you know, potentially it's fixing the deck. Maybe it's just shoring it up, or maybe phase 1 is ripping that deck out of there.
What you were started by saying the direction to DHM is, and now you're.
I know. I mean, like it's the direction to DHM is phase 1 is take what it is now and make it. What do you see working in 1 year?
But that's throwing, in my opinion, throwing a lot of good money at bad.
Okay.
You know, if we,
But they might come back and say, then what one?
$150,000 on a deck and patio area to rip it out in 5 years.
Phase 1 is take it off.
We're going to do that in-house no matter what.
Oh, so we don't need to even say that to DHM.
No, we haven't had an opportunity to do that, but it's always been the plan that Public Works
Okay.
and Parks and Rec is just going to remove that deck.
I think we need to remove that deck.
Right. And then, you know, it's problematic. Can we go 4 or 5 years with
And I think that
nowhere on the back of the building? I mean, I realize that's easy to
So what
say
is-
in a meeting.
This is making.
The reality of it is like staff we're the ones that take the beating on that.
I know.
Chris, every day we'll be hearing.
It's the
"Where's
same
the
as the
deck?
lift.
Why don't the bathrooms work? Why is the lift not running?
Totally.
So how do we if that's the plan, I wholeheartedly support that. And I'm all about the finish line as opposed to the journey. I
Yeah.
can go 5 years denying the community some resources.
Yeah.
Knowing that we're working towards something bigger.
So I wonder if taking the deck off
Yeah.
helps the community. I guess where I was headed with that, it helps bridge between like, if there's this plan with DHM
Mhm.
that is moving in the direction of kind of eliminating some of the constraints at Kendall.
Mhm.
And then we start to see some of the things breaking down. You know, when we see the lift breaking down, we realize how important it is to us. We don't realize that when it's working and it's magical. And so the phase 1 of DHM is potentially a little bit easier in terms of relationships and presentation because the community sees the debt come off and we feel like, okay, we have to work on Kendall. And so if that means, you know, that this phase 1 is going to look like this, I'm comfortable with that. And so phase 1 from DHM comes out and it has, you know, the building in place. What I've always wanted from DHM is a really scaled back version of like 3 phases that imagines Kendall basically as is. It's some improvements, but it's minimal.
I mean,
To a phase 2 of a higher spectrum of like, or if you're willing to look at taking this building out, it could look like this.
right.
That's what I want to see DHM do.
I think the only thing that's problematic about that is that how do we get a consensus on that direction? Because you're essentially one opinion.
Uh-huh.
And I support what you're saying. I see the vision. I think if the community needs to wait to develop these things correctly, that's wonderful. But the reality of it is, as we start stripping away services, the community perception is that this department is neglecting Kendall and letting it run.
Uh-huh.
We're letting the chairlift break down. We're ripping the deck off and not replacing it.
Sure.
And I'm okay with that because I can see the finish line.
Mhm.
But the community perception will be that we're not doing our jobs, we're not maintaining anything, and we're letting things break down. And that can only, I think we can float that for a couple of years, but we need to let the community know that that's what's going on.
I feel a little uncomfortable with saying like, we'll knowingly let the lift break down. I don't think you guys meant that. Like, that's a safety thing. It's dangerous. And I don't think using friction at Kendall as leverage to get a bigger plan agreed to is okay or a good idea.
Right. No, I'm saying that would be the
To clarify
perception.
that, I
We
don't
of
think that
course
was
would not
intended,
let the
but it
lift
could be
break
heard
down.
that way. Yeah. And-
That's a great pause.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I want to say that. I also think we're kind of off track a little bit talking about these, like how we deal with the real issues that we're facing with operating Kendall as is, if we don't put $100,000 or $200,000 into it right away. I think we still should go back to saying like, what do we want to tell
DHM.
Lee
Mhm.
in terms of the scope of what he's preparing in terms of plans and design. And I think we should separate that from like, how do we manage operations of Kendall for the next 2 years? And I know they're related, but I think we should still, let's pick
Fair enough.
one and deal with that. I think
Okay.
for the Lee direction, if he can quickly provide us with a sense of like overall scope of where things go,
Mhm.
that everybody's happy about, then and we can get like a beautiful rendering of what it might look like in 10 years,
Mhm.
then we can start taking off the more
Maybe
realistic.
that's what it is. Maybe it's just the farthest out that we need DHM to do.
Yeah.
What we need DHM to do is just the farthest out plan and scope that he can
So,
get to.
so I think the direction is, and we need to verify it with the board, but I think the direction is we want the 10-year, like full result scope
Mhm.
in the rendering. And I think if we can get that out there and post it up, like when you see like the airport expansion renderings, like in Durango, like they put that up like 2-3 years in advance. They're like, hey, we're going to be working on this.
Yeah.
There's going to be a closure of the runway for these days. And for these weeks, the building's going to be inaccessible and baggage claims going to suck and all this stuff. But it sits there for a while and people see it,
Yeah.
have notice, and
I
it
mean,
becomes accepted. And I think that's what we need for the like vision of what that's going to look like, is we need a pretty picture that sits out there for a while. The community can provide feedback on over the course of a year or two,
Mhm.
but where we also can be knocking off smaller projects like the ice skating rink and improved parking and other things. But I think for Lee specifically, we need the highest and best use of the whole space.
right. We don't need Lee to spend time doing something to clean it up over there as it is right now.
I mean, are we saying that we're going to pursue that with no financial strategy of how to acquire it?
I think
Because I was coming from a place initially.
I think the answer is yes.
In these okay.
Mhm. And I think where I agree with Shane, and I think I was sounding a little bit, I think I'm glad you called me out on that sort of
I know.
dynamic with the
I know you meant.
community.
I just-
Is like if the deck comes off and we don't provide some nice pictures of what could happen over there, there's stress. That creates stress and that falls on your shoulders. And that's not a good, that's just not good for the community dynamic. But if what DHM can do in the meantime, like as we're working with some of the safety issues over there and the daily ins and out of management,
Let's ignore all that. Let's just
we're ignoring that and we're like daily management's happening.
say
The strategy with DHC
And there's-
is the master plan of no,
Creates renderings.
okay.
Of like, this is what. Because I do think that helps the community wrap their heads around what the feeling of Kendall is going to be like. Like I actually started to have some panic about changing Kendall so much that it didn't feel like the same Kendall to me anymore, or it didn't have that magic that it has. And so I think it would be great to have DHM work towards only the farthest spectrum of like, this is what it could look like when the ice rink is over here and the parking is like this. And we have a little storage unit here. And we have, some ticket and rentals happening here. And like, we have park benches and a trail system linking the Kendall Trail to a Animas River Corridor Trail. And he sort of is dovetailing in the Animas River Corridor plan with something magical at Kendall. And it's the farthest reach for us. And yeah, there's no funding attached to it. It's really like the best case scenario for what Kendall looks like based on the planning that's gone into Kendall so far, the planning of the Animas River Corridor project, and all of those things kind of come together to create what he puts out there. It's anticipation of, or it wouldn't include this terrain expansion idea because that is a very overwhelming project and they don't do that. But I think it doesn't preclude that from happening. So if, saying like, okay, we're not doing this right now.
or go a step further. It anticipates it happening. It doesn't design it. It just anticipates it.
Like in the event,
You're on the direction you guys are saying.
okay,
I guess I was just more rooted in attainable development in both the short and long term.
I think I feel really optimistic of what you guys.
We can design an $8 to $10 million hockey rink and put it on the map, knowing that we're likely gonna have a really hard time attaining something like that.
Wait, why would?
But that's true. I feel like, so I think Lee was definitely steered in the first iteration to like what we could accomplish quickly, right? Like the design plan that he presented is like, we could do that in probably 2 to 3 years. And I feel like that
We
was
pursued it aggressively. Yeah, I think.
maybe
I think we
5,
could.
but I think
Yeah.
that that's how he was steered. I don't think that's what we expected or wanted. I think we want the ambitious plan that takes 10 years or longer, but that we could do chunks of in the next 5 years.
I mean, I personally just haven't heard that sentiment from the community. I just haven't.
I mean, that's what all of the Kendall visioning was for.
I know, but when I talk to various people in the community, what I hear from them is we want a covered ice rink. And we want it yesterday, because it's already been 20, 30 years that these things have been on the table. And my concern is we can have this great plan with no path to get there. And I guess I was rooted in what's realistic for us. We've only been financially stable in this community for 2.5 years out of the last 30. Things can change. I guess I was trying to.
feel like you said that you don't have a strong opinion, but it sounds like you have a very strong opinion.
Maybe I was trying to blanket. I think I do. I probably do have a strong opinion about it, but I don't call the shots. I mean, I execute the will of the trustees. And I guess I'm just providing you guys with
So I think what we're trying
devil's
to
advocate
do,
argument, because these are the arguments that I hear.
so I think what we're trying to do is your opinion reflected like what Lee did, and we're trying to course correct, and you're
Okay.
trying to not. And I think we still need to course correct.
Okay.
Because
I'm
just
happy to
because we
follow that
develop the
direction.
bigger plan, like we're still gonna get community feedback on that. They're gonna say, we hate this. Like we don't, or they say we love it.
Mhm.
And just because we don't know how we're gonna get it done today, doesn't mean that it's not possible to get done.
Okay.
And I feel like if we set our sights on something smaller and more attainable, we're permanently limited to that.
I think in the short term, does it make sense to have DHM come up with two renderings of like, these are the two 10-year plans, like one
Yes,
operating around the constraint of keeping that building.
yes,
And then the second one operating off of like, we're planning on getting rid of that building. And you have
yes,
the two renderings. Because either way, this project's gonna outlive this board. So if the
yes.
next board pivots or does something differently, then they have, those phases roughly laid out. And some like reason for our direction when we do make a decision on which way to go. And it gives the public some like input of like, we're pursuing this one and that's why the deck isn't happening, or like people want to keep the building and we can operate around the constraints that way.
I mean,
Nice.
I see Sally getting excited about that.
I just.
That's asking them to do two master plans. And I just think that that's inefficient. I think we need to speak up and give clear direction and say, we know what we want to do. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to pursue.
But we can't do that because we have to have the community's input. I mean, I think we have to have a multiple model way to present ideas at Kendall, because we have to have the community be able to say what they prefer.
Right.
Like I would feel really uncomfortable sitting around the table and just saying like, I think the ice rink should be here and I think it should be an $8 million ice rink. But I think someone else is going to sit around the table and say, I think the ice rink should be here and it should just simply be covered. Because I would rather take some of that money and put it towards
And I think
trails along the Animas River corridor.
I just feel like those are running next to each other, and it's like saying, hey, we want two different plans, and that's okay if that's what we're directed to pursue.
I think we want two different renderings. To kick off some community engagement. We need where I think the community gives better feedback is when they can visualize it. And when they can say that, like, and just simply in the way that the community builders, when they had their rendering guy here, and he was sort of popping up like, this is what, he was using the Stanley Placer as the playground for this work. And he was just quickly putting in like, there's a bridge here and this is a building and this is some housing, like not master plan, but just a rendering, because what Jordan is, I feel heard when Jordan was speaking, I'm like, yes, that's what I'm imagining. Like we have certain constraints. If we want to go with those constraints and the community feels strongly about that, then this is the direction that model A looks like. And if we remove those constraints and we give ourselves either more time or more money or more creative freedom, this is what it looks like.
I think what I'm hearing is we essentially want to do master visioning as opposed to master planning.
No, we want design, but to get to design.
If it's spatial arrangements, that's visioning. Master planning is, we have a completed plan in December of this year and we begin to execute it over the next 10 years. We're not going to button any of these things.
I think if that's how framing it makes sense, then yeah, like that's, I think the disconnect.
Okay.
Is that we do want visioning and we don't need construction plans till the vision's set, and we don't have a vision, and that's why planning feels weird, like disjointed.
Unless we just go back to the visioning sessions that happened for the Kendall master planning process in the beginning.
I think
But I think that won't work.
think differently than I think Todd is. So I think you're saying like what we're asking for,
Yeah.
that we're calling planning, Todd's calling visioning. And when we say, and when you say visioning, you're hearing like back to the drawing board. Like that's not it. I think we want to see the layout of a base area that can support the things we're currently doing plus significant increased capacity.
Right. But
For
not,
all four seasons, like
any,
mountain bikes.
but no executable plan.
Well, it depends.
To
So if we
pursue
can,
that, we're just going to be having spatial arrangements and
So
scope and scale.
it depends. So if he can develop this and it's significantly sooner than December and it costs less than $48,000 to develop the visioning, then we could use the remainder to develop the actual construction document for one piece of that. And maybe it's the ice skating rink, or maybe the ice skating rink's too ambitious to take on right now. And it's just, how do we do the trails layout and the bridge? Like things like that.
I think Lee got that direction at the last meeting. I just don't think, I think he had to read between the lines to get it.
I kind of wanted to
If
lift off.
say, let's go big, no restraints, let's see what the max is. I think he just needs to be told that instead of kind of needing to read between the lines to pull that away.
I mean, I left
You know.
feeling like that's what we told him.
Yeah.
I mean, I said dream big.
Dream big, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see it.
I did kind of want to walk.
I don't know. Are we doing something at Lackawanna? How do we get there? We're like, yes.
I guess
Like,
I just
figure it out,
felt-
like, show us something.
You know, I guess I just felt like that was the consensus of, there were 5 trustees we didn't hear from on that. You know?
I feel like the board gave this direction and then you pulled it way back.
I know
Now we're
Dave
like,
supported it, Jeff supported it, Jordan spoke up, Shane spoke up, and I definitely spoke up.
To me, I feel like the real crux is just whether or not we want to keep that building, and we need to figure that out before we do.
Yeah, that's the practical.
Right.
And I kind of wanted,
He had to read between the lines. No one said, let's pursue this because as if we're going to rip that building down. It was,
come up, he brought it up.
it came up, but no one, and I understand why, but no one directly said that to Lee, like, imagine that building is not there and run with it. And I think that's what he pulled away, but it wasn't direction to him,
Okay,
you know?
I mean, I think what I was trying to communicate with him and possibly did a bad job. I actually think I might have communicated something different in dream big. When I say dream big, I absolutely do not mean dream big structures. I absolutely mean dream smart, like dream and like lift. I wanted to come out of the Google map and into a new world. Like I didn't even want to see, I mean, obviously we have to stay on the terrain and we need to stay on the map and we need to sit next to the river and we'll have certain terrain features that are constraints, just like the building is a constraint. But I kind of wanted to see it like the Stanley Placer, like being able to just say like, what if you pulled up to Kendall and, you know, you drive over here to park and you,
I think
this is not my job, but I just need to lift out of what we have there kind of and be able to visualize it in an imaginative way.
I think the clear direction is, we don't want to see resort development. Like, we don't want to see a bunch of big buildings that look like
Right.
every other.
Or huge parking lots.
But we want to see a way to figure out how to address these uses. And we have the list of uses already. We have anticipating expanded terrain, anticipating many more visitors there of both locals and tourists. So significant improved parking. We do want to see placement of an ice skating rink. We want to see a bunch of trails that connect the base area to the rest of town, like they already showed us.
Weddings, events.
Ability to have, large
We
events.
have the list.
Like, we want to see the ability to have it be a music venue. Like, we want to see all of these uses incorporated in it. And I feel like what he showed us was like the iterative version of it instead of the full refresh version. And we want to see the full refresh version.
Absolutely. And I think that's, I think he even knew that when he presented that, you know, he was showing that vision. And the next time he comes back, those are all going to have detail to them. I think I have the direction that I was seeking and know how to proceed here.
And who knows, this could be a funny process where we come right back to what you're
Yeah.
advocating for.
Right.
But I think we do need to see the other direction pursued somewhat.
And I think that's great. I think we need to see the full scope of things. And then if we need to hone in on certain aspects of it, that's great. So I think we can move on.
Yeah, it might be at one of the circles. The spiral.
I know that we're not going in the order of the agenda, but do you want to brainstorm on how we address the failing infrastructure at Kendall for the next year or two and have some type of strategy discussion about that? Because I agree that like anticipating the lift breaking is bad and
I mean,
taking away the deck without being able to provide some alternative use or other benefit to the community is also.
I mean, I think the only plan there can really be status quo. There's not, you know, I have Kendall chairlift maintenance on here.
Yeah.
The lift runs right now. There's nothing wrong with the lift. You need, you know, if this is the path we're going to pursue and we're pursuing a 5 or a 10-year plan with this big vision, which I'm wholeheartedly supportive of. The community needs to be comfortable being denied those assets and being denied some of those things, you know, we can only solve problems on the lift as they present themselves. So
So like one question I have is, instead of it, like, how expensive would it be if we do a huge paver patio? Like, deck gets ripped out, we put stairs from the doors down, and then we have a massive paver patio with some like picnic benches and other things.
that's
We like,
essentially what we have designed. We've just got a little extra landscaping put in there. I would estimate 125 to 150.
to remove the deck and just put a patio. instead of
That's
a deck.
essentially what we had deemed planning, and our budget was 125, I believe,
100,000.
100.
Okay, what about no paver patio and just, you know, fire pits and picnic
We
benches?
do have a grant written right now for the Kendall deck. And that one is through edit, and we should know by October for that. So
Hmm.
I just kind of wanted to throw that one out there. We're utilizing the Columbine project as our match because it includes the Columbine and the Kendall deck and Memorial Park, but it doesn't look like they're gonna fund the Memorial Park aspect of it. So we just have those two grants right now. So just kind of keeping that in mind.
How much is the grant for the Kendall portion?
The Kendall portion is, I think that's the 125,000. That was.
25, and I think we did 100 and was it 200 for the landscaping portion of the Columbine Park project? We rolled in 5 or 6 large projects into a much bigger OREC grant, and
So I think anticipating ripping out the whole deck from the whole entire thing and then building out staircases that go down to the ground level.
it doesn't meet ADA. Like there's building code also in there. I mean, we could certainly do that, and we can find a way
I'm
to
just saying,
do it
like,
and make it
building another
ADA
deck
compliant.
is expensive, and the problem is the roof lines.
Right.
Like building a large patio on the ground, if we can figure out how to exit the building to that patio, like that provides the community with the same exact amenity.
Well, that's what
in a much
the
less
Bosworth
expensive
plan reflected, essentially.
And the Bosworth plan just isn't fully engineered. It's not fully engineered at this
It
point.
was supposed to be completed by last November.
So it's renderings and not engineered.
Had a hard time just getting progress.
I guess I was just trying to see if there's like a quick step to engineering it so that we can take the deck off and do some sort of, wood chips or.
It's not ADA, wood chips. I mean, you can do maybe crushed refines, gravel.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
even if we're gonna tear down the building at some point in the future, and that's what the ultimate plan ends up anticipating, like maybe it doesn't, but if that's where we go, then I think putting $100,000 into, 5 to 8 more years of use of that particular building is reasonable.
I would agree.
Instead of saving the money, but taking away a
Mhm.
significant community asset.
You're saying it would make sense to invest
I don't think it's like throwing good money after bad to put
right,
100,000
for 8 more years of use. I agree.
for 5 more years of use. 20 grand a year for the community to have like a big outdoor space over at Kendall.
Then, that would lead me into, if we pull out of this current design contract, should we assign that project to DHM? Should we go back to RFP and find a different engineer to design that 5 to 8 year use?
Do we still have budget left for what was being spent with Dean?
We should, because certainly haven't expended all the funds and haven't been billed for a lot. And that's part of the discussion we need to have regarding that contract.
And the issue is just that Dean became non-responsive.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that could just pivot over to DHM unless that violates some type of town policy
I mean,
on how we award contracts.
We could, in theory, pull the money out of that contract and add it to the DHM budget.
Because I think that's an interesting thing to ask them too. It's like this dream smart big plan, but also like what's our 2-year or 3-year executable version of that provides the community with significant benefit at Kendall, even though we're pursuing a much longer, bigger vision.
Copy. And I think part of where I was coming from with like visioning versus planning is I feel like a lot of this direction we should be providing to DHM, not looking to DHM to tell us what they think we should do, even though they are excellent at what they do. And that's kind of what.
Documents to tell them, like community-based documents. We are not the community. So our committee can't really tell DHM what to do, but we can provide them with, what the Animas River Corridor project already looks like and what the Kendall Visioning process looked like to give them some, at least a foundation for like, I'm going to move the ice rink here because I want to put the parking lot like this because, you know, that input does exist
Mhm.
and they can, you know, reference it if they're like, oh gosh, does this need to be more of a wedding space or an ice skating rink space? You know, I think that reading those documents, it does seem like the community is fairly clear on, you know, they want this to be a community space. They want it to be for the community in the spirit that the community uses the space. And it's, I mean, they can ask Chris. Chris knows, knows how the community uses the Kendall space as it is now. And I think being able to just look at that from the perspective of like, let's say we had 50 more skiers a day. Let's say we had 200 more skiers a day. You know, where are they going to park? Where are they going to go to the bathroom? How is it going to still feel like a small community ski hill? Where are they going to buy their lift tickets? Like I don't want to speak for you, Chris, so cut me off at any point. I'm very verbal, but like the way lift tickets are sold now kind of works. Like, you know, he's managing the lift and coming out and selling a ticket. But if that were, you know, that's not a super sustainable, that doesn't work with like
Well, that's what I mean.
200 more skiers.
That operating that way another 5 to 10 years, that the community just needs to know that. So Chris isn't getting beat up every day.
Yeah, so
That's kind of where I'm coming from is like,
from the perspective of town government, we want Kendall to function in the best way possible. And on the day-to-day, in the day-to-day way, that is creating an added burden for you guys. And so like, I agree with Shane, it would be awesome. I don't know if this is possible to separate these conversations from like, when we're master planning and doing like big design ideas over there, that can't fall on Chris's shoulders from an operational standpoint.
but it does.
But we want to do a good job of visioning and we want Chris to be successful and set up for success on an operational way. But it feels like a different conversation. It feels like, okay, if we're going to head in this direction with DHM, that's not on Chris's shoulders. How can we separate that conversation and have a more operational one for you guys?
So I think one of the things we're getting hung up on is spending money on something that ultimately isn't going to remain for a long time.
Correct.
So I think that the way to present that is like, we could take this stuff away and work on a plan that's going to take us 5 to 8 years and the community is just going to have to live without for a while. Or we could spend money on something every year up to the point that we get to do the overhaul so that the community can maintain the benefit. So we're still investing in the community's enjoyment of the asset by spending money to temporarily sustain the use until we get to the point that we can actually build the bigger thing or the more thing, whatever that is. But so I still think that we can. I like the idea to go to like really specific stuff of taking the money that we were spending with Dean, give it to DHM, say we need a usable version of outdoor space around the Kendall area so that we can still host weddings and generate that revenue and provide that resource to the community when they're over there. And we still want the bigger, possibly tear down the building version of this that we can, you know, get after in 5 to 8 years or 10.
Yeah, because I think not allowing our brains to think, you know, about what could be possible because we're stuck on like, how is the deck going to work in the next 2 years? It takes away from both parties. You know, it takes away from your daily operations and it takes away from better long-term design. So it does seem useful to just to separate that and set up.
And even if it feels like wishful thinking to pursue the bigger vision today, I think that like if we thought about what our constraints were 5 years ago and we only planned for what we could have achieved 5 years ago today, like if we had plans from 5 years ago that we were adopting today based on our constraints 5 years ago,
They'd be attainable now and they wouldn't have been.
They would be right. And so I think we're trying to do the same thing. And I imagine like even in our smallest version, like the town's planning to build something like 42 housing units. Like that's just the town. Like we're not even anticipating like how many private development Residential units are going to come online in the next few years. So even if it's just that 42, that's, 50 to 100 new people. And so if we have 50 to 100 new year-round people, like we're already pretty much maxing capacity on busy days at Kendall. And so I think we need to figure out like when those 50 to 100 people are here, like how are we going to manage them? And like once those 50 to 100 people are here, there's going to be even more significant demand for more people to be here. And it's like, it's just going to keep compounding.
I mean, I'm more than comfortable with the direction you guys are providing.
Okay.
It's nice to know that we have the trustees' support if there are these Band-Aids and stopgap measures we're using for a couple of years. And that's probably what it's going to be. We should expect the complaints to continue, but we have an answer to provide the community, which is, here's why that is. And here's what we're pursuing. And here's the reason we're pursuing it. And that at least gives staff a direction to provide to the community and an answer to their questions.
And as uncomfortable and less desirable as it is, I think, to have the community upset and complaining. My original point is, I think we get a better product when people are upset and complaining than we do when we're creating the magic.
Well, if everything works as is today and we're destroying something to anticipate future need, then the community gets really upset when we like take something away. But if it's already struggling, then they see the reason that we need to plan for future need.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel comfortable with this conversation providing further like clarification around the conversation the whole trustee board had in terms of like how Lee receives direction. But in terms of the Dean contract becoming part of the DHM contract, I think that has to be on the
We'll have to look into that. Yeah.
But I think that's something that the whole board should vote on.
Absolutely.
Or at least provide direction.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to take, kind of the takeaways. A lot of these questions I had were more for me.
Okay.
I'm not going to call Lee and pivot the direction. I think the direction he's pursuing is kind of already been given to him at that meeting.
Well, if you feel like he needs more clarification than anything from today was helpful, you should go on.
I mean, I think the consensus is, the direction he's already been given at the last trustee meeting. So I don't think
Unless
the need
there's an
to.
element of like building or no building.
I was kind of seeking the justification for that, and I've got that now. And I think this is a really healthy discussion.
I mean, I think providing Jordan's comment to Lee would be helpful. Like consider two versions of this, one without the building and one with the building, and tell us which one you think works better.
I'd be happy to clarify that.
And I think
that's already kind of where he's going, but I'll reaffirm that with him and say we kind of want these two parallel plans to be going on. Awesome.
And he doesn't necessarily need to spend a ton of time drawing it out for our next iterate. Like if he wants to present something that's just like a rough like idea.
Yeah.
I think that's what the last one was. I mean, I think
I'd say that same level would be totally fine. And then once we like all are like, yes, this is the idea that we were hoping to pursue, then you could spend the time on like the nicer.
I mean, I was kind of thinking like if it could be something of like a bird's eye view, not off the Google map though, but like a bird's eye view where you sort of, he says, yep, you come in on the bridge and we decide to put the parking over here and we have. What's that?
Yeah, that's what he showed us.
The last one.
Yeah.
Not in terms of like, obviously the scope would be different, but like at the presentation, do you mean something
The
different?
spatial arrangements of like where stuff.
Yeah, but also just like saying like this is without, if the building's not here, then the building can go over here and the ice rink can go over here. And we have these trails that start to link up like this. And it's because I think ultimately it would be really nice to have the facing Kendall version, like the airport style, visual rendering for the community to see.
Yeah, but we need to know where things are going to go before he can get into that level of detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it would be important to not have a whole lot of discussion about like getting in the weeds about the architect, the way something looks like. If we were to take that building out and then put this building over here, and then all of a sudden you see the visual building, but he's not an architect. And I think, it's just this balance of like, I want to visualize it, but let's not get in the weeds about.
I think he's going to make what you're hoping for.
Perfect. Let's move on.
That was very helpful. Thank you all. I think that was a great discussion. So Growing Dome grant for seniors, the area Center on Aging, is that the name of it?
Area Agency on Aging.
Area Agency on Aging. Grant was applied for through the senior center for it's about a 40-foot by 40-foot grow dome, like geodesic dome, fully funded by the Area Center on Aging. The grant was awarded to the senior center, and we're not really sure where to put it. And they're asking the town to provide a space for it. I don't want to speak for Gloria, but I have some concerns about not knowing our spatial arrangements in all of our parks and the visitor center, Memorial, Kendall. So we're looking for direction to see if you guys are comfortable putting it somewhere, if we need to deny the grant, if we need to.
How big is it?
40 by 40.
40 by 40, and it's on a concrete slab. It requires a foundation.
And the other component to the grant is also a master gardener for 5 years.
Yeah, they'll fund someone
The full-time.
to grow the food in it for 5 years as well.
Who,
And do they have a person for that?
like who specifically?
Was it?
It was the Area Agency on Aging, so it's through,
But did like Carrie Metzler apply for the grant or just,
apply directly. This was, so this is, someone in Durango that runs this program and,
they're just like Silverton needs that.
yeah, and they basically said, yes, Silverton did this.
They do, yeah, but they didn't, I feel like it's one of those things where the process should have been,
Yeah,
hey, would you like this? This is what it would entail. And
That's exactly right.
yeah,
The cart was ahead of the horse on this one.
the problem now that we face is that
We have a card.
there's a free great asset that creates a job for 5 years that's funded, and it would be awesome to have it, but none of the planning leading up to these things exists. So like there isn't a space allocated for it.
Right, and the obvious ones are the obvious ones. It would be somewhere by the visitor center, somewhere at Kendall, somewhere in Memorial. And I guess my concern all along has been that we really have no plan. And it's one of those things where we could put it up and 2 years later need to move it.
Does the grant cover the building of the foundation
I believe it does.
and the pad and everything?
I believe it's entirely
Or a cement pad and then you put the dome over it.
correct.
Do we know to what extent
And it does require power, irrigation, et cetera. So it does need to be in close proximity to a water line.
do we know to what extent the actual location in like a quadrant of town matters for the success of the growing? Because like certain parts of town.
That was my question.
Others.
I did ask that question and I assumed you wanted it south facing. They actually said you want partial shade. So due south facing is problematic because it essentially gets too hot. So, but this would be a year round operation. So we also would need to think if we're going to pursue it about access. If we plop it in Kendall in the Northfield, for example, we would have the seniors,
And we want seniors to access it.
correct.
Yeah.
It is tied to the senior center.
And is there any space on the? Wait, what'd you say, Chris?
I said the baseball
The
diamond.
baseball diamond, it doesn't get used for much. The field is in pretty bad shape and it has most of what you're talking about infrastructure wise already there. And the parking lot. All kinds of reasons why it would be good.
That's also one of the only undeveloped tracts of land that the town still owns.
Is the baseball diamond in the avalanche?
It is. I believe it is.
blue, but not the red.
Yeah.
So that would just mean that any high Abbey danger days, they wouldn't be able to access the dome.
Correct.
That's-
But I also just think in terms of like the track and the ball field are more than likely going to come to the forefront as the
Yeah.
collapses of available land. And that land has probably got a much higher use than a grow dome.
Right.
Eventually.
I guess what's staff's direction here to the trustees? Like is the direction like we should try and figure it out, or do you want us to be the bad guys that get to say this is an awesome opportunity that we don't have the availability to take?
I don't know if I'm comfortable weighing in on that because I see the value in this and I see the value for the seniors and the food would, I believe, go to the farmer's market. Or could be a fundraiser. you know, something like this, if the seniors were to grow this food, sell it at the farmer's market, they could get into a more self-sustaining model of funding for the senior center as well. So I see all the benefits, but I also just kind of sit back and I say, land is at such a premium right now. You know, if any other group came to us and said, we want a tract of land for free, would we give it to them?
Do we know what volume of produce, just like how many people it feeds on a monthly basis?
This
No.
is huge.
Figure it out, but what if we wrap it into something else? Like and I'm just like imagining the map of like all the town properties. What if you wrap it into like the Zanoni property of like gonna go on this part
Near the affordable housing.
near the
Yeah.
affordable housing?
Well, yeah.
I mean, we could also roll it into the Kendall master plan and say, you know, we're gonna earmark a space for this in our DHM planning. I mean, that's really the direction. I would like to pursue it as best we can, but without
Or
jeopardizing
collaborating with
development or,
and Stanley Placer. But then it just becomes it kind of becomes a constraint.
and
Are any of the
access.
school
remains an
playgrounds
issue.
like currently like problematic or underused? No, or like that playground next to the library?
I mean, I think the best place.
Very
for it
used.
Personally would be right next to the schools.
Yeah,
Spot, but
even
there's
like-
really nowhere to put it.
Stanley Plaza is not a bad idea too. And there's that area like directly behind the preschool that's not gonna really get utilized anyway. I don't
And
know if it's
that's-
part of the,
Have you?
I'd have to see
Kim?
a map.
Kim White?
No, I have not. I've just met with Carrie and I've met with the rep.
And this is just a
AJ.
wild hair, but there is no space by the red trailer.
That it's just problematic because all the infrastructure we have there is semi-permanent because it's in a street. So if we decide we want to pour a foundation essentially on 16th Street or whatever street that is.
Okay.
And I mean that we've essentially said, we're going to allow the town to develop these streets. Because right now, everything could be pulled away from there if we wanted to move that.
Right. Okay.
And that's another consideration is like, do we like that modular where it sits? Do we want to move it somewhere and put the grow dome next to it? I mean, we can think a little big on this, but it just seems kind of like a shame if we were to pass up the opportunity,
Mhm.
but I also don't think we're prepared to just.
How much does the master gardener job pay?
I thought it was like 25 or something a year. Right?
How big does the pad need to be relative to the dome? Is it also, is it like essentially the same
I
size,
think
40 by
the
40? or
dome
does
is
it
like a
have to-
40-foot circle and the pad is like 42.
Can I send you guys some back?
How wide is this room?
This room?
We're saying like 40-foot diameter.
Huh?
About 25 feet.
This room's
I was gonna say
25, so,
27. We've measured it.
Mhm.
so we're almost double the width of this.
I
room.
mean,
It's big.
Yeah. 40
How
feet
tall is it?
Big.
It'd be
You grow fruit trees.
40 high. So it'd actually be taller than any,
I mean, might not, 40 high wouldn't meet building code.
Is it 40
Yeah.
40 feet in
Or-
diameter would make it?
no,
38
no,
foot.
20 feet tall.
30 is residential and 40 is BP.
And that's another consideration too. I don't know, off the top of my head, we'd have to consult with the planning department where
Very
you're
large.
allowed to place a geodesic dome.
I mean, think like,
You know,
so,
can you put it in the historic overlay? Can you put it? I don't know.
so think about our downtown buildings that are on two lots, like the Wyman. So the Wyman's 50 feet wide and just under 40 feet tall. I mean, the ceiling's lower than that, but then there's like the facade, like it would essentially be the size of half the Wyman in depth. Like that's huge, huge.
Could we see too if there's any seniors that have any lots of land or areas that they would wanna put it on?
And maybe asking someone, like talking to Jordan more extensively about like how this would really work. And Judy Zimmerman, maybe. I could,
It could grow a lot of food in there.
it's a lot, it's huge.
I'm trying, I have some blueprints here that I'm trying to pull up just to make sure our measurements are.
Is it
accurate.
clear? Do we have a picture of what this particular one?
Yeah, I've got the plans right here. You can.
Is that what
Is that company out of Pagosa that built
I
this?
sent you the program.
It's called growing spaces. I can pass my laptop around here, but that's what we're.
But so there's still like visually they have, like there's ones that, like I just Googled it and there's ones that are like totally clear that look like this.
You can just pass that to Sal.
I got it. I think I,
There's ones that look like this. There's ones that are.
I think it's
opaque,
similar to that.
But then there's also like because that's a sky gazing dome, but then there's like the growing ones sometimes look like this.
Mhm.
And like whether you can see through it or not,
That looks
pretty
like,
significant.
that looks like the lunar, like Mars development.
You
That's like.
growing season that's too short.
Yeah,
So it looks, let me zoom in, I think I have the height here. It looks like it's actually only 16 feet tall.
this is not like a true,
So it's 41,
Gotcha.
41 feet across and 16 feet tall. And.
It's very,
and it-
is there any way of getting a smaller one? Or do we do that?
they're doing this.
Here, this is what it looks like. This is
In
a
like
40.
5 or 6 municipalities, like they're awarding these to multiple.
I wonder what other
This
municipalities.
is what, this is a 40, it actually doesn't look that.
Okay, I have that one.
2-foot dome.
16 tall-ish.
Wait, I've been to one of these. You know where there's one?
Nice. I mean, I think we should
Yeah.
pursue this, but it's just problematic by
you
nature,
put
giving
it.
up any land. You know,
I mean, it's definitely the size of a full residential lot.
and that's
So,
kind of where I come from. And I said
like
that to
building a
Lori, is
house
I
or
was like,
something,
when
you
you
know.
think of the value, we would be giving up essentially
Of a building lot.
$220,000 worth of real estate at the going rate to
Mhm.
support the grow dome. Even if it's given it to us for free, that's the reality of the expense. Community benefit is there though, obviously. It's a great thing to do.
Oh, Jordan, what do you think? I mean, you manage our little greenhouse at school.
yeah. I mean, I am 100% for this. I
Okay,
just, yeah, I think finding the right space for it is. But I think having that.
and you
con-
think we have
I
the
think having that
capacity to
conversation with
manage?
The school too, because I feel like it would get a lot of utilization, not just by the seniors, but potentially by other.
Yeah, I mean, the Stanley Plaza's in
Function like a-
senior center too, so it's walkable.
Yeah,
It could function like a community garden.
and I think if you put it in like one of the, back corners or something that's gonna get less utilized.
Yeah.
So for the sake of direction, why don't I work with Jordan and Kim and see if that's a viable option? And then at the next meeting, I can return to you kind of with the results and we'll say school was interested in considering it or they weren't, and we could kind of go from there. I'm just a little reluctant to use any of our municipal park space.
I agree.
Without a master plan for each of those. When we finish Kendall, we should probably move to one for Memorial, a visitor center, and
Great.
this is gonna be decades long. It'll
I
probably
agree.
be through the end of my career, those plans, like-
I have a bunch of questions about the grow dome, I think that we would need to answer before this would come from the trustees too.
Okay.
So the questions would be, like, does this exist in another community already? And how is that going?
Okay.
How much food production is there actually? What are the ongoing like maintenance and utilities expenses? And is that covered by this grant? What's the salary for the master grower for the first 5 years that would have to be taken on by the town or the proceeds of sales of?
I think it's 25,000 is what's budgeted, but I'll confirm that.
Okay.
Yeah, and then what's our plan beyond
What's
the
our
5
plan
years
after
when it
5 years?
expires? Does it become a community asset? Are we gonna continue to have that staff grower?
What's the anticipated useful life of the dome? It's like, we know like the useful life of a roof on a house and like, how long do these things last before we have to replace it? Because the pad is permanent. The rest of it,
Those are all excellent
10 years.
questions. Yeah.
because I was just looking at the proposal and it doesn't have a whole lot in there.
Okay, cool. I think that's enough direction and I'll get in touch with Jordan and Kim and see if that's a viable option.
Because even though it's coming fast, like you said, that I think this $220,000-ish of property plus $100,000 of the dome and construction plus another $125,000. So we're really looking at almost a $500,000 project.
Could be worth reaching out to like MSI too, if they're,
Oh, that's a good one.
MSI is still thinking about building their like science center.
Mhm.
Could,
And maybe the recommendation is we kind of go through this process and say the school, MSI, there's other viable partners and maybe one of those partners is better than the municipality.
Or it's a joint,
All of them.
maybe
Yeah.
everybody partners together to do it.
Great.
And that way it all.
And it's okay. I mean, I think, we can add up the real estate cost and I think adding up maintenance And those costs are important, but also looking at growing food is just a real value in and of itself. I'm comfortable with
And
that.
I just like thinking these things through. So like ideally you want it near the senior center, at least.
Yeah.
At least they've expressed that they would like to be able to hang out at the senior center and then go do the gardening. You know.
And
is it
hopefully that's still a quasi temporary senior center, and that at some point we have a different senior center that's more robust somewhere.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at is, you know, is the senior center going to stay there? Or are we going to relocate that and then want to move this? You know, there's just, it's hard without these master plans. So I'm really glad we're diving into these master plans.
Why can't
Because
him just tell us what the Stanley Plaster is going to be? So we can, who's kidding?
Cool. Well, I think that is great direction and know how to proceed. So Kendall Deck contract, obviously we need to bring that to the trustees. I just kind of wanted to make you guys aware. Dean does excellent work and we have some deliverables from him, but you know, it's been a little frustrating. We were planning on constructing the deck this summer. And having blueprints by the start of, or by Thanksgiving of last year, we still essentially have nothing we can actually run with. So it's the recommendation of staff that we execute our, I'm not sure what the legal term is, but we execute our ability to, terminate that contract, and we'll have to develop a strategy, whether it's DHM, whether it's a different RFP, whether it's putting that project on hold. But we don't feel that we're going to be able to wrap up the project.
Should we also, before it comes in front of the trustees, ask DHM if they can take it on and if they can provide like a proposed budget to like take it the last step?
Sure, I could reach out to Lee prior to doing that.
Because maybe they say they're too busy.
Well, that'd be
Maybe they say this
helpful.
dovetails nicely.
It would be helpful if we could provide a solution to say, hey, we're gonna pull out of this contract, but here's how we're gonna move forward, as opposed to just backing out with no plan. So if you guys are comfortable proceeding that way, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so no decisions made, but just direction to find out if DHM can cover that project.
Okay.
And then when it's presented to the trustees, there will be and then if that doesn't work, if DHM says no to that, it's probably worth exploring like what else could work
Or if our process.
as a plan B.
Require us to bid it out again.
Yeah.
Okay. So next would be the ball field strategy. This is really kind of spurred on by trustee Cranker, at least bringing it to our, Chris and I are always hyper aware of what's going on down there. But that's become, you know, our capacity is pretty limited with Chris, myself and David. We are trying to get an additional employee to keep up with things like mowing and all the stuff we do. And that was essentially something that I had told the guys not to prioritize in lieu of prioritizing things like Memorial Park and Kendall. So when we start thinking about a longer term strategy there, the questions are, do we want it to remain a ball field? It does see use, but it's very light. We used to have a tournament down there. That tournament has kind of stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Do we still think that's the best use of the space? Do we want to give the community direction to have work days down there? I'm actually going to pull Chris in here to speak to some of the problems as far as why it's problematic and why we haven't prioritized it internally. So I don't know if you want to, what's your experience with the ball field?
Like a decade ago, the irrigation system failed there. And it's a problem, it's a big problem. I'm not 100% sure, but one of the pumps failed and it sat there from before when I even started taking care of it.
Mhm.
And without irrigation, it's kind of difficult to maintain any kind of, turf.
Grassy area.
And the field itself has been sitting there so long, it's no longer flat.
Yeah.
If you ever played baseball in your life or whatever, you know that you need some consistency in your outfield. It doesn't exist. It's gopher holes and ruts and big rocks and things like that. So even offering it to play on now is kind of dangerous. Like I wouldn't want kids to play ball out there right now. You know, the infield's safe, but you could take a step into the outfield and break a leg or something. And just like pest control that needs to get done out there. One of the other real just, you know, like that sewage plant right there, the ponds right there. Most of the time you're standing there breathing that. Probably part of the reason why nobody really uses it, you know, because it's not a good experience on many levels. So
Additionally,
You know.
there's animals that pick things out of the sewer plant and they deposit them in the outfield. And, you know, so between the gopher holes, the erosion, the kind of sanitary issues we have out there, and the lack of use, you know, why I was hesitant to give the community direction to go essentially start cleaning it up is I didn't know if the direction, quite frankly, would be better to say, take it down. And, you know, the fence is okay, but it's got problems. It needs to be fixed. I didn't know if it was a better use of essentially the volunteer hours to say, we're going to start coming up with a plan to move forward here.
Mhm.
But we can't really fix that up without doing a significant amount of site prep, essentially bringing in filter or leveling it out, regrowing the grass, you know, fixing the fence. Are we better off just thinking, is there a better use for that space and saying with the community hours, we'd like you to take that fence down, you know, and start moving and start
Jordan, have we
prepping
been
us.
using it for soccer? I coached some soccer down there a long time ago. Are we using it for soccer anymore?
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Leo was trying to put together a league this summer, and he was the one that I think talked to me and Dana,
Mhm.
and that's when it came up at that meeting. And he was like, "Hey, like we'll go over there and like we'll fix it." But like they tried to
But
put,
it's those gopher, I think, fire call.
and so that
Gopher holes are.
that's kind of where it started. He was like, "We could get a whole crew together to help, but this sounds way bigger than that."
I mean, we've also struggled with large scale recreational programming like that, you know, and it's one of the reasons we haven't prioritized it is baseball takes 9 people per team at a minimum. It is really hard to get 18 people to go to a league every week in the summer.
Right.
Especially with such a large service industry that we have in town. So I have always prioritized kind of individual recreation.
Yeah, it's not, it hasn't been a great.
recreation because we're a town of 700 people. It's really difficult. You know, the high school doesn't have a baseball team that I'm aware of. They play in neighboring communities.
How many people show up to soccer when you do these? Like you came yesterday.
And I've been doing it every summer for the last like 10 years almost. In the summer, we've had the most people, and I've been averaging between 15 and 25 people every Thursday night
At
at
most.
soccer, which
That's-
is ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really successful.
Hmm.
You know, that's impressive.
So the reason that it came up in that meeting so quickly is that it would, especially with what's been happening with our community the last 2 years, like it'd be awesome to support like a organic
Mhm.
desire to do this thing, but it doesn't sound like it's executable there or like that. Like that's another $100,000 project, like move all the dirt,
To do it
fix the
correctly,
irrigation
So
system.
my question is it more about playing baseball or cleaning up the front of town?
that would be great direction for us to receive. It sounds like it's a little bit of both. And I would hate to strip away an asset like a baseball field that we already have. But when we start thinking in terms of master planning, that track area and that ball field, you know, if we keep seeing the explosive growth, like that may need to be affordable housing, that may need to be,
So
you know.
I know that we have a ton of recreation space around the town, but I also think that communities that didn't prioritize maintaining in-town recreation space have regretted it.
Absolutely.
So I think that it's really important that we think about our park spaces and our green spaces within town that are flat, that are accessible by everybody.
Mhm.
Whether or not that's the ideal one, but I don't want to say like we have this demand for housing, so let's just make everything housing. Like I think that would be a mistake too.
Sure. You know, and like in the instance of the track, we have people that use the track and they use it
The
regularly.
track team uses. it.
Regularly. It's in very poor condition, but there are people that use it regularly. Do we, ultimately in the next 10 years, want to pursue redoing that track? Can we justify that expense
I would also-
relative to the users that we have? These are some just kind of larger.
I would also from thinking of what the future looks like. I would assume that the RV, whatever that's Red Mountain RV is for sale. It almost sold to someone that was going to do a subdivision, like the land that next to the affordable housing is likely to fill in with residential. So I do think that end of town is going to become, or that as a resource is going to be walkable to that end of town for a lot of residents.
And
It's like right now, Memorial
made walkable.
is what people walk to.
Mhm.
And like nobody who lives on this side of town's easily walking down to the ball field or the track.
Right.
But
so
if all of a
it's still
sudden we
handle a
have-
portion of the community.
But if we have between 50 and 200 new units there in the next 10 years, like that's going to become as in demand, if not more so than this end of town park space.
Right. And I guess at that point, I would say, is it best serving those residents on that end of town as a track and a ball field? Or should we be pursuing that as an open space park, similar in asset design to Kendall, but without the
Or like.
infrastructure, and that really ties into the Animas River Corridor plan, because you could essentially be at the visitor center in that park, hop on the Animas River Trail, cruise over to Kendall. That connectivity is really important to keep intact, and it kind of ties in with the south edge of the RMP and that RMP so I guess.
I mean,
How's an ice skating rink in terms of size relative to a track? Would it fit within a quarter-mile track?
Absolutely, I would think so.
So maybe that's also something to think about, that if we're going to put it
Feel like,
over
yeah,
there.
I was gonna say, I feel like just coming up with the plan for like Memorial and that at the same time, it's like also a soccer field would totally fit within that track. And they used to have soccer practice over there and it's just not
Right.
great. Memorial's not a great fit for soccer either anyway, but
So do we think longer term about down by the visitor center essentially being our team sports complex where we have baseball, soccer, track, and all of those assets going on? And then Kendall is more focused on like individual recreation. That's kind of like our team sports complex.
So I have a feeling there must be data out there about how small and medium-sized communities benefit from these types of assets, and to what extent whatever's shifting in society and schools and use of these things, to what extent are communities seeing massive benefit from this or not? And I think that could drive the decision. So and maybe not in Colorado, but how have other communities benefited or not from creating new recreation facilities like this? And I would look at it as opposed to should we maintain it or not? I would just say how important are those things to the community from other communities' data? And then if we find out that, a community that didn't have a track that invested in a new track, saw all of these benefits, or same thing for a soccer field or a baseball field, then I'd be like, okay, that gives us direction that we should prioritize figuring out how to do that in the relative near future. But if, we hear all of these communities have remorse because baseball is becoming less popular, or, some other thing like that,
Right.
and it just is an asset they have to maintain that is underutilized, then maybe that could also drive that decision to lean more towards doing open space park.
Right. Like I look at Ure and I don't spend a lot of time over there, but I've never seen a softball game on their field. What I see is music in the park, and what I see is people using that park space, but I very rarely see 18 people playing softball in that.
they play like ultimate and.
Right. So a lot of that is rooted in personal interest and personal hobbies. Someone who plays baseball, of course, wants a baseball diamond, but how many baseball players do we have?
In Silverton.
There's none. And can we justify $100,000 to fix the ball field for,
So I think
20 people or less?
what's really interesting is I think that applies so soccer is popular here because Jordan's here. And there are other people
Right.
This is,
nobody's, and so if Jordan were to leave, investing in a soccer field might be a bad investment. The same thing's true for a track. The school's super big on track. I think that's something that will sustain. The school's a little more permanent than Jordan, no offense. But I think the same thing's
school has had a track team that's been successful for many years.
Right.
Or
Also-
basketball is another example, it's
key. We've got
driven.
but we have 8 people in the community that play hockey, and we're talking about investing in a multi-million-dollar hockey facility.
Yeah.
And it's all these things are kind of like the same.
I agree. And I guess, this is that same thing of when we're master planning, we can have these discussions, we can do this visioning. A lot of times I think it's driven by the success. If our track team is successful and they're going and they're competitive on a state level, I think you can absolutely justify and say, we're kind of a track community and we pump out high caliber track and field athletes, and like if your football team is successful in a community, you build a nice football, it's a lot of times based on what your community.
So we've said we're a
Yeah.
ski community. A lot of people said we're a hockey community.
Yeah.
We're definitely a track community.
Mhm.
And it's a question like, are we a soccer? Are we a, baseball?
I mean, like I don't know, when we were talking about the ice rink, just like being able to use those spaces for more than one thing too.
Totally.
So it doesn't feel like we're committing.
Yeah.
Do we see the
All money
community
to this.
growing in the next 20 years to a point where our school independently could field these teams? Do you think we'll ever have 300 kids in this school and we'll be able to have our own soccer team and our own
Well,
baseball?
I do see what I would love to see.
Maybe 100.
I mean, we're close to 100 though, aren't
I
we?
mean,
I think we could have 120.
Yeah.
But what I really could see is that right now, the way the school and the town function is that the school manages sports and recreation for kids. And before COVID, there was a fairly significant management of adult recreation in terms of gym use and that kind of thing. And potentially, like, as your staff grows, like as the Parks and Rec department grows, that comes away from the school and it's more of a club thing. So if you had someone on your staff that's, doing recreation programs for kids, like in Durango, you just go and click on like, there's gymnastics, there's baseball, there's, the rec department would then have an individual that is a soccer player and they would run the rec soccer program for Silverton, and that would develop. Then it would develop and it would be a heavily used.
Right. But I don't think we've achieved critical mass on any of those.
I agree.
And
I think,
we need the participants, but we also need the management, the referees,
oh yeah,
person
I know.
scheduling it all.
very aware.
Contacts. I mean, we're far away from that.
So similar to how we were talking about figuring out a stopgap for use over at Kendall.
Right.
Is there a version of like something like some low hanging fruit that could create the ability to utilize that space for something for the next few years until we see what type of growth we have and demand there is for those?
I think we just need clarification on whether this is a baseball issue or a beautification at the end of
Yes.
the town issue.
That's what I want to find.
And then I could come up with a strategy to say, okay, here's how we can make the ball field usable for 10 grand. Even if it's just bringing in fill dirt and filling that in and leveling it off and doing some like grading type work and attempting to regrow the grass. Or do we say this is a beautification thing? Why don't we just take the fence down and just leave it as a field and we'll mow it?
Totally. That's my curiosity is, do people want to play baseball? Or do people want flat space to use kind of like the way that Uray? That was a great example. The way that the Uray field is used is like running dogs, playing ultimate. Occasionally there's a baseball game, but it's just a flat, beautiful, it's just a flat, nice grassy.
Fill dirt and grading would not be terribly expensive. It's hard for us to take stuff like that on in-house anymore because we're just really, you guys have seen the list. We've got hundreds of projects going simultaneously. But if we go to RFP, say we have a budget of 10 grand, we're looking for someone to just come in and do some grading and fill in some of these holes and do some rodent control. We could do that rather quickly, but you're not going to have a playable ball field. You're going to have a vacant field.
Sandlot. Great movie.
We could make it a Sandlot type
Uh-huh.
kind of thing, or we could just say what we want is beautification. So we're just gonna grow some grass and wildflowers over there in the meantime and earmark that space for something in our tenure. So maybe we should
What
just.
do you think, Chris?
I don't think you want a sandlot there.
I don't know.
Have like a big bulldog over there and just let it park at people on the chain.
Yeah, next to the sewage plant,
Yeah.
it brings issues that the grass kind of hide.
Right.
But when most people, if you go down there, you'll see the visitors pull into the visitor center, park at the fence and walk out into the field and walk around. That's usually what I see there. I
Yeah.
very
It's more of a
seldom
dog
see-
park.
Yeah, I don't see anybody playing baseball or
How expensive would it be
like that.
to plant some trees at the lot line there that kind of hide the view of the sewage plant?
Yeah, that'd
Like, would
be,
that be an expensive project?
I doubt it. I mean, trees are pricier than you think, but in the scale of like,
Yeah,
it's got to be cheaper than building a fence
yeah.
or something like that.
it would
I
be
might
nice.
project here, because this does,
Because we just started spending money.
yeah, oh, I heard money and I'm gonna talk. So as part of our budget process, and I've been working with Todd on this, and I'm proposing this to the finance committee next week, but having a couple of public comment periods basically on certain projects to help us prioritize these projects a little
Nice.
bit more. So it would give you guys the kind of, oh, the community support is here or
Uh-huh.
it's here. And so identifying those projects, I think is a really key part of this.
Yeah.
So if the baseball fields and like the revitalization of that area is one of our projects, then we can bring it in these kind of, it's a prioritization with the community. And so they're given X amount of dollars and they can only spend them on
Mhm.
certain projects.
Mhm.
So just keeping that in mind as you're thinking about kind of these projects and how to prioritize them, I am going to be requesting that we go to the community for that.
Great.
That sounds good.
Cool. So, in the shorter term, I mean, are we comfortable waiting for that process to see through? Do we feel like we need to take some kind of immediate action down there? Do we want to authorize the community to go have a work day and do what they can do? You know,
I mean, it seems like some,
I'm just always uncomfortable a little bit letting people loose without clear direction for a volunteer workday, because we don't know what we're going to get out of those volunteers. As far as,
I think it might
you
be
know, what if they
worthwhile-
decide they're going to build a rock wall along the outfield and we don't want that. You know, you just never know what they're going to do unless you provide them with a clear direction of what would be helpful.
I think it might be worthwhile to have just a community like 30-minute walk where you ask whoever has been pressuring Dana and you ask Leo to like go for a walk out there and you just like, and you talk about like what their ideas are. And then you provide them with the clarification you gave us about like, this is what it really entails. And then be like, do you see anything we don't? And then I think you'll have appeased the people who are kind of pushing for it to be something now.
Mhm.
And you'll also be disseminating information about, you know, how challenging a project that would be, so that it's not just like someone hears like, man, this is like, why can't they just go out there and fix it? Like, we should have a baseball field today.
Right. And that's kind of the sentiment that Chris and I have become very comfortable dealing with is, you know, people come to us and they say, you're neglecting this, you're neglecting that. And we say, we're not neglecting this or that. We're prioritizing other items, or we're developing a longer term strategy to adequately address these issues instead of putting these Band-Aids on them.
But
So
I think inviting people, like, it could be part of the community input that Gloria's talking about too. But if you like allocate and advertise 30 minutes to be like, hey, let's go have a community walk in this town of Silverton space and let's talk about it. Not only will you give people an opportunity to see it and to disseminate information, but you'll also find out like how important it is to those people. Cause like maybe nobody actually even shows up. And you're like, okay, like it was important enough to like have a conversation when you're walking down the street, but it's not important enough to go to that end of town and like meet with people. And I think that's helpful knowledge too.
I think that's
But if you do it and 50 people show up and you're like, all right, maybe we need to prioritize this.
well, why don't I plan something like that out and we'll see what the response truly is, and that'll kind of be our stopgap measure, and we'll kind of keep on the back burner here that, you know, as we're wrapping up a Kendall master planning process, maybe the next step is shifting down towards the visitor center or over to Memorial, so we can start having comprehensive plans for really all of them are connected. And as we think about things like a perimeter trail and the river corridor plan, we're going to want to tie all these assets together in a very clear way, so they aren't mutually exclusive.
For sure. I really I think maintaining the space as green open space and usable space for the community is important. Turning it back into a perfect baseball field we'll see from the community how, we can gauge that level of interest. I think anytime we go with an organized sport use of an open space, it requires the systems and structures in place to make those sports happen. Like in Silverton, it's the individual, like it's Jordan playing soccer, or it's, Gallegos coaching the basketball team. When we lose those individuals, organized sports typically sort of dissolve here. But I do think we should be, as a community, looking at that space in a way of stewarding it and maintaining it in a way that serves the community to the best of its ability. And yeah, I don't think necessarily looking at how we're going to repurpose it for something other than community green open space is necessarily in line with sort of the direction that the master plan was heading.
Copy. Okay.
What Sally said before really resonated with me, that aiming towards a Parks and Rec department that has one employee that manages community sports events or things like that.
Like a programs manager.
Yeah. Because I think that's how we institutionalize the things that Jordan and Larry and other people have done. And then it isn't as fleeting as, having one passionate person. It's someone whose job is to create that community engagement.
Wonderful.
I think it's obviously a longer term idea, but I like setting that intention.
So I know
if the town likes it.
We've got about 20 minutes left, 18 minutes left. I had kind of forgotten to mention it earlier, so I just want to mention it. When I start thinking about Kendall and the use there, we obviously do a lot of weddings there. One of the thoughts I've had is that the most practical space, or do we want to keep that recreation oriented and community center oriented? In the Moelis master plan, that's already been adopted, we've talked about developing some sort of
Pavilion.
Conference center, pavilion, a place for outdoor events to happen up at Moelis. So one of the thoughts I've had is, do we maybe expand on that pavilion and make it more of a multi-use center that kind of overlooks the lake, where we could facilitate weddings, facilitate business conferences, potentially put a commercial kitchen up there to support those events, and kind of remove those elements of rental use from Kendall and keep it really recreation and community driven, and relocate that stuff up to Moelis and say Moelis is our event space, our rentable space. And say, do we just build a big room up there with glass windows and a deck overlooking the lake, and say, if you want to have a wedding, if you want to have a conference, that's where you do it.
How much money does the current space generate per year for events and weddings?
It's Gloria could probably give those actuals, but I know it's nosedived once Lisa left. It really has. We were doing, I think,
/COVID.
/COVID. But we're not marketing in the same way. We're not.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's
ballpark wedding revenue for this year.
I don't have that off the top.
5,000, 20,000.
I don't have that off.
I mean, when it was up and running, it was a lot.
I'll make guesses.
I would say it was in the tens of thousands.
I think
Maybe
it went from 40 to 13. Does that sound right to you?
I would have to look at the numbers. I've got so many.
Definitely don't hold me to those numbers.
So my knee-jerk,
I remember thinking of it as equal to the income from winter.
so my knee-jerk
Or exceeding.
Yeah.
to having a wedding venue up at Moelis is that Moelis generates a lot of revenue from camping.
Mhm.
And if you have something that anticipates evening events, you're going to disturb all of those campers. So you're going to lose that camping revenue, or you're going to create user conflict. And I don't think it's a great spot to have an evening venue.
I think there's potential for that, but there's spaces we could put it away from campsites. And I guess one of the thoughts I had was does the camping support the use of that space? If you're having a wedding, you can say, we're going to have the wedding in this space. And
I see it as a yes and. Let's explore how it looks through the lens of the Moelis, but not as a substitute for something at Kendall. Because I think it's a whole different experience. I think someone who's getting married at Kendall is having a different experience for their wedding than someone who's getting married at Moelis. It just seems like it's not a
We
substitute.
just have already user conflicts at Kendall.
We do. I appreciate what,
And with private uses of that, like no one can go really use Kendall right now because Hard Rockers is there.
Which is
Yeah.
partly what we want Lee to be designed for.
Yes.
Is the ability of multiple uses simultaneously.
Yeah,
and it actually, as much as I very much support the idea of like, what can an ice rink be in the summer? I've sort of held back on this because I think that multi-use is really valuable to us in Silverton. And I also feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes when we head in that direction because I think it can potentially trying to have too many multi-uses degrades any single use of that space. So I think there's a potential to say like, then we just get sort of a less usable, awesome ice rink because we're trying to share it with this other summer pavilion. You know, I think there are instances when that really works seamlessly and it may, like our performing arts center at school is a great example where that space has somehow managed to serve many uses at a high level for all of the uses it's being given. I think, yeah, I do kind of start to wonder when we start to cram too many uses in because we're just trying to overlap or make the most of a space if we degrade the actual quality of one thing. So looking at Kendall, yeah, from the wedding perspective, I think there's value in having, it may not be always a wedding space, but a space that works. Again, I just go back to the bathrooms, the commercial kitchen and like a big, beautiful space. I don't think we can go wrong.
Difficult for a municipality to maintain and offer meeting space? Like, is that a normal thing? Like, are convention centers privately or publicly owned? Like,
I mean, I guess where I come from with that is like, it's a reasonable way of funding it. Like, you know, if we wanted that space at Kendall, you know, that's a way to recoup the cost on it and it becomes its almost primary use. But then like, you know, when we do a trustee retreat, it's like, let's do it up there, you know, things like that. So there is community value in it as well.
because it's a big constraint that we don't have a meeting space like
Right.
that
A
seats
conference
more than,
space.
yeah,
Yeah.
conference space. But I guess my question is like, is that typically a municipal function or is that something that we don't need to take on or?
So that's interesting. But as far as like a conference center, so when I worked with the city of Durango, we were exploring the option of helping subsidize the conference center because it would bring people in and the economic impact and all of that. But we landed that it wasn't economically feasible for us to support a conference center in Durango. But an event center, I think, is a little different as far as, you know, a track record of hosting, you know, these weddings and events. I think that's a little different of a conversation than just the conference center, because we were looking at attracting businesses.
Because like if there were other wedding venues or meeting spaces in town, we wouldn't even be having this
Yeah.
conversation.
Right.
But because there aren't, the town's considering taking this on or continuing this. And I was just curious, like, how we should be, like, what should our foundational assumptions be on like what the town's responsibility are for offering these services?
I think that's a philosophical question. The strategy, I mean, prior to COVID, we would sit downstairs and brainstorm revenue streams and as a means of development
Yeah, and survival.
and as essentially, you know, a revenue stream to support operations if we see economic instability.
Yeah.
At some point, we may. But it's just one of those things, you know, can we, how, you know, if we build a $500,000 conference center up there, that's, you know, can we recoup those costs and how long would it take? And then at what point does it become a revenue generator?
Because I think that's one great argument for the enclosed ice skating rink as opposed to the roof covering an outdoor rink, because then you have all of these other potential uses like a meeting space or a conference center. Like you're not going to want to get married in the summer version of an ice skating rink, but it does have a bunch of other potential purposes.
Yeah. And one of the models I like, I'm not sure if it's feasible to phase it in this way, but like, you know, if we go build the concrete pad and the shed roof over it, You know, can that be phase one? And we have an outdoor pavilion space for concerts, weddings, et cetera, at Kendall. Can phase two be the implementation of like a modular hockey system that is placed in the winter and can be fully removed?
Mhm.
Can phase three be, okay, we're using this shed roof full year round now?
Mm.
And then do we box in 30% of it and say that's where the commercial kitchen's gonna go, that's where the restrooms that service the ice rink and the pavilion are gonna be to support concerts and ice skating and all that stuff. Those could be three different phases of the same project, and you're starting with a shed roof. You know, because logically, if you start hosting large events under that pavilion, you're gonna want a bathroom under that pavilion. But could that closed in area be an afterthought where you just rough plumb it when you build the slab? You know, and eventually you go back and finish the restroom.
I think that's good kind of thinking.
So that, and that's three phases over however many years, but you say, we've got a functional space immediately. But we also have the plan to grow this into a fully enclosed building. You know, I like the idea of that shed roof with like large, like ballistic nylon walls that we can put up. That would protect it in the winter. We could keep the snow out. You know, if you have a concert, you can keep the shade out, but you also have the ability to like lift them up and have it be a full open air pavilion. And that obviously is a cheaper means of construction. But are we limiting ourselves by saying we can only afford ballistic nylon walls? We're not going to build real walls, you know? So that's kind of like, you know, that's just scope and scale of development that we need to hone in on. You know, do we say we want to get this in the next 5 years, or we're willing to wait 15 years for the full deal?
With
Yeah.
8 minutes left, do you want to cover skate park improvements or the Kendall Trail maintenance?
Sure. Skate park improvements, we kind of have a little something in motion. Gloria and I have reached out to Telluride. They're getting rid of their downtown skate park, or replacing it. It's all built out of like steel. It's all welded. Our skate rink's deteriorated to the point where Sursa essentially told us to get rid of it or fix it. Repairing it, skate light is somewhat expensive. It's a lot more expensive than plywood. And we also don't really have a sustainable means of, you know, are we going to have to rebuild that half pipe every 2 years because it just gets destroyed and the screws back out and the skate light wears out? You know, it really does need to be covered or built out of steel and different materials. So this is almost more of an update, but we should start thinking about like, do we want to earmark a space for a skate park? If we get this stuff from Telluride, it's okay if it sits, if they actually give it to us. But are we gonna pave a surface that you can actually skate on? Are we gonna put it back on the basketball courts, which was problematic? You know, so you know, we don't need any answers today, but we may have a lead on some quality equipment. And it's just a matter of like, where do we put it? Are we comfortable throwing money at it? Are we comfortable paving a surface somewhere? Do we want to build this is that something that fits at Kendall? Is that something we're just going to kind of throw a little effort at and just place somewhere? So more just kind of wanted to get you guys thinking about that as we may have a lead on some progress in that area. And also, you know, do we want to throw money at building a shed roof over the existing half pipe and actually repair it, but have a means of keeping it useful? I've never given that half pipe too much effort because all I see happening is the same thing over again. And, you know, we need to get out of that cycle. And if we prioritize the skate park, we need to understand, or we need to find a way where it's not going to be a maintenance burden essentially annually. So, I mean, I like the idea, similar to what I was just saying about that pavilion at Kendall. Do we want to say, okay, let's build a shed roof, let's pave underneath it, and let's have like ballistic nylon walls where we can protect it in the winter. And that would actually, you know, give it some kind of sustainable life. I mean, you guys know decks, half pipes, things get hammered here. They don't last a year, you know, so. And I have received quite a bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? Interest in pursuing a skate park more recently. There's community members that want to help, that want to volunteer.
Well, and that's one of those like individual sports versus something organized.
Exactly. And how much money, would we be comfortable throwing at that in the next year or two, that more just food for thought. I just kind of wanted to update you guys. It is something we've been thinking about. It is something we're actively pursuing with Telluride.
To me, plunking a skate park in that where it's disconnected from pavement is problematic. But I don't know. I don't ever skateboard. So Jordan, you've done tons of skateboarding and tons of skateboarding with kids, but
Yeah, and the basketball court is nice. It's not ideal for neighbors in the past, which is why the ramp ended up there in the first place.
yeah.
But I've been talking to Levi. He's been getting donations from people to fix it up. It's like $1,500. Yeah, $1,500 to replace the skate light on it currently,
Mhm.
and he's almost got that.
Wow,
But
that's so awesome.
we want to find a better space for it because, like Todd was saying, it's just going to get ripped to shreds by the weather.
I mean, I'd also say that replacing the skate light is great, but structurally it's
Needs a lot,
falling
yeah.
apart. It needs, we can replace the skate light, but the whole subframe is still,
It's soaking wet.
yeah,
It's just waterlogged.
so that's wonderful, but are we gonna have to raise grassroots $1,500 every 2 years to replace that skate light? So just something to think about, as we talk more with Telluride, if we get that stuff, then it would really kind of ramp up this conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe in the meantime, what I'll do is reach out to Levi and just kind of see, building a shed roof over a half pipe, probably not that big of a deal. Could probably be done pretty quickly and at a reasonable price. I imagine under 10 grand. Honestly, we looked at building a shed roof to cover the ADA walkways at the senior center, similar materials, probably similar square footage. And we got quoted at about 10 grand. So
You know what kind of ramps Telluride has? I haven't seen there.
the ones they have literally they're by the transfer warehouse. They're like downtown. They're not covered, but they're all built out of welded steel. And I imagine they just replace the skate light every year, but their subframe is solid.
It's like a block and a half down from the library.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if they were like mini ramps and half pipes, like what we have now.
It's pretty significant.
Based on something that's not concrete.
It's quarter pipes, boxes, rails. I mean, it's closer to a full skate park.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
But also you look at Telluride and it's like, okay, well, they put $20,000 worth of materials on probably a $4 million lot as a community service. So where do you know what I mean? That's a great thing to have downtown. It sees tons of use.
It does.
And, I'm sure that real estate is worth more to the municipality than a skate park, but they earmarked it as a.
Yeah, they just
skate
said this
park
is
and-
valuable.
And people love it and it's got a valuable, intangible value to it as a community asset.
There's some really good grant programs with skate parks too.
Mhm.
There's the Tony Hawk Foundation. I think they changed the name of it, but
Mhm.
they award a lot of money to towns, especially underserved communities.
I've pursued about 4 years ago, pursued a grant through them, and we basically didn't have the amount of skaters.
Yeah.
They want to see that like you're a skate community and what you're missing is the skate park. And it's like, I don't know how many, when the half pipe was new, it saw daily use by pretty significant groups of people. I used to go skate it quite a bit. And as the condition waned, so did the interest in using it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you got like, where the ramp sits now, you could easily blacktop that end
Mhm.
and make it smooth and provide us some area to skate on. That's why I quit using the ramp, is because I don't want to just skate the ramp,
Right.
Yeah.
And there's literally nowhere
Yeah.
in town
Yeah.
that's worth skating, like no,
Yeah.
like, and you're not welcome on the streets for what it's worth, and
And there's rocks everywhere.
rocks everywhere.
And there it's, yeah.
Basketball court is prime, and I have like my little like movable fun boxes for the little kids. I get like 15 to 20 kids in skateboard club at school.
It's kind of small though, like I'm grown up, I want to I want to get some lines, man.
Yeah, everything I have is.
It's just, yeah, just one trigger. Kind of thing.
Real quick, Kendall chairlift maintenance was on here. It's okay, we didn't get to it. Maybe we can get another meeting here in 3 weeks or a month.
Yeah, and maybe that gets lumped into just like any supports that you need for those daily operations or.
It's a tricky thing because we're not fighting the lift itself. We're fighting the narrative of why it's down. And,
Right.
And I think Chris and I are in agreement that the reality of it is and Palma says this too, it's not broke, don't fix it.
Oh, that is
so
something that we've brought up before. I wonder, Todd, I was thinking about this earlier in the Kendall conversation, is looking at like per the narrative, if there's a way to do a quick, semi-quick investigation into like, we could get this used lift, it would come with its whole host of problems. We could buy a new lift that goes 200 vertical feet for this, maybe just sort of a little scan in the industry of what's out there to potentially just say like to the community.
Yeah.
We have this lift because a used lift is this much and it has its own maintenance issues. And a new lift is this much. And are we willing to spend that much?
Thanks, Shane.
Well, they can't put new lifts in right now.
I-
They have too much
I-
going on. They're 10 years.
That's right. It's not available.
I just think that's hard